Welcome to another edition of Where's a Teaspoon, where we share stories of our colleagues across DCHS to give you a glimpse of the person behind the badge. Today I'm chatting with Elzabet Lombard. Elzabet is originally from South Africa, but has worked as a physiotherapist in both Singapore and the UK, and she is currently business manager to our chief executive here in DCHS. Elzabet, welcome to Where's a Teaspoon. Thank you for joining us. How are you?
Hi Emma, and thanks for having me. It was quite a surprise, but a great honor to be asked to be the third person in the series. So thanks for having me.
Oh, very excited to find out more about your story. So, for those of us who might not be aware, can you give us a brief overview of your role as business manager here in DCHS? What kind of work does that entail?
Yeah, so I have a managerial role at DCHS. That's not how I started my career, but that is how it sort of developed over time. I have one of these jobs which probably, if you're working on the front line, you probably won't really see me much. Um, So yeah, I work directly to our fabulous chief exec Tracy Allen, and in doing so, I work quite closely with all of the executive team. The best way to probably describe what I do is I'm an extra pair of hands for Tracy, really. So there's quite a lot going on behind the scenes um, to make the trust work and to run the trust. So I do quite a bit of report writing, and I do quite a bit of joining up some of the dots that we need to join up in terms of monitoring the performance of our trust and giving account of that to the board. So yeah, ironically, a lot of my job involves writing, which and writing to hopefully a decent standard, which when English isn't your first language is a daily struggle. But yeah,
Yeah,
we keep
yeah.
going.
So you were born and brought up in South Africa. Can you tell us when and why you decided to leave?
Yeah, I was born and brought up in South Africa, and I have to probably at this point say that um, my reasons for um, moving around the world is entirely driven by fun-seeking, adventure-seeking motives, and I I did it absolutely for the joy of it, and I could at any time go back, and I still can go back if I really wanted to. And therefore, I'm very conscious that my story probably isn't representative of a lot of the immigrant population in the UK, because it was always my choice, and it was always for good, positive reasons,
Mm.
rather
Yeah.
than, perhaps some others who had to leave, be it for safety reasons or often for financial reasons to try and support the families back home. So I know my story is a very rose-tinted story, and I'm very aware of that. But
Yeah,
it is a
yeah.
happy story and it is a good story. So yeah, I grew up in a very remote, very rural part of South Africa. So if it was Australia, you'd probably say it was the outback. So it's very dry, yeah, I grew up on a farm, a huge sheep farm. We need to have big farms there because it's so dry and there isn't much for the sheep to eat. So my upbringing was very Afrikaans, very conservative, very religious. Quite a different world to the world I'm living in now, really.
Mm.
But happy. I had a happy youth. So when I finished my physiotherapy degree in 1999, I just wanted to leave and see something else. So bear in mind at that point, I've never ever been abroad, never left South Africa. I could barely speak English.
Never. Wow.
No. Um, and I picked Singapore. I can't even remember why. I think I met someone from Singapore the year before and thought, oh, that sounds good. So yeah, I just wrote, I just wrote to a number of hospitals in Singapore. Um, and one of them wrote back and gave me an interview. It was also my first job. I've never had a job before.
Mm.
So I got on the plane and off I went. It was fabulous. It was really, really lovely experience because it's a very cosmopolitan country, Singapore. You can really experience just a multitude of cultures there. It's a fantastic place to go to for me when I was young.
How old were you? I know you said you just finished a degree, but how old would that have been?
Been 21.
21.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So it
So
was the
very young.
wanderlust of youth then that just you wanted an adventure. Yeah.
It was indeed that and nothing
Yeah.
else. And that was, I look back at my 21-year-old self now and I think, wow, I'm impressed.
It was
Not sure.
very
I'm
brave.
not sure
Yeah.
I'd have the balls now to do that.
Yeah.
But I did,
Yeah.
and it was great. Yeah. And
Mm.
then after a couple of years, I came to the UK, which is then where I stayed.
Why did you move to the UK from Singapore? Because you said you enjoyed Singapore. It was a fun place to be.
Yeah, I think I was always going to come to the UK. At the time, that's no longer the case, but at the time, South Africa had a working holiday visa agreement with the UK. Quite a few other countries, predominantly Commonwealth countries, I would imagine, had that agreement. So if you were young, so I don't know, between the age of 18 and 30, then you could come and stay here for 2 years. You could work or not work or travel or do odd jobs or do a proper employment. So it was a very attractive option for us South Africans, and pretty much everyone I went to university with came here. So by the time I got to the UK, it was kind of one big university
Yeah.
reunion. and and it was incredible fun, but perhaps not the right way to do it, because in those first few years it was very, we were very much moved within our South African community. We stayed together and
Mm.
socialized together and all that. Spoke Afrikaans all the time, which is not necessarily the right way to do it, but that's how we did it and we loved it. And then usually after your 2 years were over, many people went back, but because I was a physiotherapist, it was easy for me to get a work permit in the UK and stay on. So I stayed on, and well, yeah, eventually I married somebody from the UK, which meant then I really stayed on and never went back. So most people that I spent those years in my 20s with, they mostly went back to South Africa, and some of
Mm.
us stayed on, um, and went on to have families and English children.
Yeah. How many children do you have?
I have two children. They are 9 and 11, and to my eternal shame, they can't speak Afrikaans. Uh, I tried. I tried quite hard at the start, especially with my first child. But the problem I had was I then was I was the only person who could speak Afrikaans to her, and
Mm.
my husband doesn't speak Afrikaans, and I wasn't moving in circles where people spoke Afrikaans. So then it just became difficult, because when she could start speaking back, I would have to explain to people in the room what we're actually saying, and it just
Yeah.
became hard work. And then I had another baby, and it was chaos, and it just fizzled out really. And it's a great shame that I let that happen. I do regret that.
Can you tell us a bit more about your experience of living in the UK as and you weren't born here, you spoke a different language. Like how easy was it for you to assimilate into the culture, and what kind of challenges have you faced?
I think if you had this interview with me 20 years ago, you'd probably get quite a different answer, because everything then is fresh and new and strange and foreign. Whereas I've
Mm.
lived here so long now and I've integrated so
Mm.
beautifully, it's difficult now for me to see the change that's happened over time. But um, thinking back, I come from a very specific culture. So
Mm.
even though um, I can string together a sentence in English, and even though I look Caucasian, and you know I, I recognize the food in the UK, a lot of the stuff that I found culture shock. Maybe I would have found a culture shock even within South Africa if I just moved to a city. I
Yeah.
don't know. So
Yeah.
it's definitely a much more liberal society than the one I grew up in. Very, I think the UK is marvelous. I have consistently found the people absolutely fabulous, just welcoming and just taking taking the quite mixed makeup of the British society, to a large extent taking it quite in your stride. Now, again, I speak from a privileged position. I look a certain way, which means until I open my mouth, I can hide in plain sight. You wouldn't know. I mean,
Yes.
if I just
Yeah.
walk in the supermarket, you couldn't tell I'm from another country. Which, if
Mhm.
you look different or dress differently, like some other fellow immigrants do, then maybe your experience would be different. I personally can only speak for myself, and I've found the British people just lovely and very interested in where you're from and your story, and often very well traveled, and just I find it a really tolerant, lovely society. So it wasn't difficult in that sense to move here, but there are other things here that's hard. January is hard. I'm sure
Yes.
it's hard for British people, but it's really hard if you're from a sunny place.
Yeah.
So again, if you have this interview with me in June rather than in January, it would be a different answer as well. So we
Mm.
struggle. I continue to struggle with the darkness and the bleakness of the winters,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then the rain in the summer. So I mean, it sounds petty, but it it that was difficult, and that remains difficult for me. I struggle with the winters. This year I
Mm.
bought myself one of those sad lamps,
Oh
this
yeah. How's it
seasonal
been? Has it worked?
seasonal effectiveness or
Yeah.
the lamp. I don't know. Mostly we laugh about the lamp in the house, so that's probably that's probably what makes the lamp work, as we all see the
Yeah.
ridiculousness of the situation. So yeah, winters are hard and continue to be so. It's very hard to be away from a family.
Yes.
So I have none of my relatives here in South Africa. Of course, I have my own children here and my husband and his family, but I have nobody here that's related to me.
Yeah.
And that, if anything, gets harder as time goes on. It gets very hard when you have children, because you miss that support network. You feel
Yeah.
desperately sad that your children don't grow up with their cousins and their grandparents, but it also bring in a huge element of guilt, because I feel so guilty about denying my parents their grandchildren, and
Yes.
really close relationships that they probably would have had with them had we lived closer by. So the
Mm.
family element of it is hard, and I have much more empathy now with my parents since I've become a parent, and I'm desperately hoping my own children don't do this to me when they when they turn
Yeah.
18. I'm like, please don't go. So yeah, I look at colleagues, whose children are leaving and going and live overseas, and I know for the child or the young person it's a great adventure, but I can see now for the parent it must be so hard.
It's very
Um,
heartbreaking.
but otherwise, culturally speaking, I just find the UK it's just enriched my life enormously. You've got such a rich cultural heritage, and there's so much going on here in terms of music and literature and just creative arts. It's a fantastic place to live in, and
Mm.
in terms of the influence of the UK on the world, although perhaps that's shrinking, I I do feel living here, I do slightly feel at the center of the world, and I feel, when the UK speaks, it does actually matter, and I love that. sense of being at the center of the world. South Africa is quite a remote place doing its own thing.
Yeah.
So I love that aspect. Yeah, otherwise, in terms of simple things like food and that, we love cooking in our house anyway, so I cook what I want. It doesn't hold me back. But yeah, cuisine-wise, it was an easy transition. We probably have quite a Western diet in South Africa in a way that you would recognize it here. So that sort of things wasn't difficult. When I went to Singapore, that was harder. Breakfast didn't look like breakfast there.
Yeah.
I didn't recognize it. It was exciting, but definitely more of an adjustment. Whereas that side of things here was quite straightforward. That said, there are a few things that I'm still to this day. Bread sauce, I don't understand
Bread sauce.
Yeah, I don't understand
Nor
it.
do I.
I think you need to have a think about bread sauce.
What's a traditional South African dish then that you still enjoy cooking for your kids?
There's a pudding. There's a sort of a tart that's very traditional. It's called a milk tart. It looks when you look at it, you think it looks a bit like what you would call an egg tart. Is that what you call it in the UK? Where it's got a bit of like not clove. What do you put on the top of it?
Nutmeg.
Nutmeg. Yeah.
Egg
So
custard.
custard. Yeah. So it looks a bit like that, but it's more. Yeah, it's a sort of a set custard, but it's got cinnamon on rather than nutmeg, and we bake it in a pastry case, and that is a very, very traditional thing that I make a lot for my kids. Oh gosh, I make all sorts for them. So there's also regional things that's specific to my region that that even in South Africa isn't very well known, that my kids just take for granted. So yeah, I can I'll happily send you a few recipes. In fact, on Monday, the exec team, we're bringing in some food because we're having a bit of a kind of all-day meeting thing. So I'll take in a milk tart for them. Because it's not something that you'll go, oh, it's a bit grim. It's nice. It's like a set custard, but with cinnamon. Where some of the other things might be a bit weird. We eat
I
a
need
lot
an
of
example
meat.
of the weird. Yeah, give me an example of the weird.
So by far the biggest South African thing, that wherever you go, the first thing everybody will ask is, where can I buy biltong? So biltong is a dried, cured meat, and we slice it. It's beef or venison that we cut the fillet out, and then you hang the fillet up to dry, and you spice it with coriander and vinegar and stuff, and then we slice it in little thin slices, and you eat. It's a bit like beef jerky that the Americans have, but different. South Africans are obsessed with it. And then there's a sausage version of it called droewors, which means dry sausage, which basically is a beef sausage that's been cured and dried, and again we snack on it. You just eat it as a snack. So that South Africans are obsessed with that, but I think that's maybe a bit a step too far for many people here. Not for my family. They love it because they've been eating it since they opened their eyes. My husband loves it. So we also have things that's probably a bit grim for you. It's a meat eating culture. I can't cope with all the meat when I go there now. After 2 days, I just don't see any more meat. And South Africans' way of if they want to show hospitality and love and being welcome is to just throw more meat at you. Like the more meat you get stuffed down someone's neck, the more love you show for them.
So don't go there if you're vegan then.
No. No. Okay, so I'll find some recipes and email them to you.
Oh yeah, great. Is there anything else that feels jarring or strange, or and I also wondered when you talked about the issues for migrants that, that missing family and perhaps feeling a bit alone when you're raising children, that longing for a familiar landscape. Do you tap into any support networks of other migrants in this country?
Yeah, it again, if we had this conversation at different stages of the last 20, 22 years of my life, you'd probably get different answers. So initially, I wanted everybody I meet to be different and not from South Africa. That's what I seeked. I wanted to experience something different. And then it changes, and as I grow older again now, I do I, I there is definitely a longing for something that takes me back to, I think, to my youth more than anything. South Africa's changed so much, it isn't it's a lot of things are different, much of it for the better. But um uh, so maybe I should explain when I first left South Africa, I went to a place where it was a complete cultural mix of people, and that was fantastic. And then I lived in London, which is also a complete cultural mix of people, which is fantastic. And I
Mhm.
lived
Yeah,
in London for a long time. So in neither one of those experiences was I particularly an odd one out. If anything,
yeah.
it was quite the norm to um to not be um to not completely fit in with the country itself. So in London, it's so mixed, and it's so normal to have an accent, and it's so normal to be from a different place that is just normal. You never feel in any way odd. So when I left London and I moved to Derbyshire when I got married, it was the first time I really lived somewhere where I did feel the odd one out. Not in a bad way, but just, I would most of the time in any room be the only one who isn't from England, or the only one who speaks in an accent that is clearly not from these parts. And it was never a bad experience, and nobody made me feel bad, but um, it was the first time I actually experienced that sense of
You
being a
yeah.
foreigner,
You were
which,
aware of that difference even if it wasn't called out, or yeah.
yeah, yeah. And um, again, I must repeat, my experience has really not been a negative one. It's been a
Mm.
fantastic one. However, um, I would sit in pub quizzes, and it's about, I don't know, TV in the 80s in the UK, and I
Yeah.
don't know what anyone's talking about. So
Yeah.
so then it's just a fun thing, but you do feel a bit stupid, and probably look a bit stupid as well. And it's just because I truly don't know what you're talking about.
You've not had
Or
that shared cultural
no,
experience, yeah.
exactly. Or bands here that was big when people my age were young, and I'm like,
Mm.
I barely know a song of this band,
Mm.
and I know other bands that you don't know, but we never talk about that. So it's kind of that
Yeah.
sense of otherness that um it
Mm.
it is it is there every day. Um I went some time back. I went to my kids' school to give a talk about the NHS. Actually, I gave a talk about the NHS, and then everybody wanted to know afterwards. They asked my son, why does your mom speak funny? Because they don't get many moms who speak funny who come to the class, and then I think,
Mm. Mm.
not a bad experience, but there's that sense of otherness. So it
Yeah.
goes in waves, and you might find that be really, really interesting to hear other people's experiences. But it goes in waves in terms of how you experience that. A lot of the time, I don't mind it. If anything, I quite enjoy the fact that I'm a bit different, and then other times you just you, it's not nice to be the odd one out. And I'm
Mm.
so aware that my me being the odd one out is quite limited to probably my accent and kind of my cultural heritage, but there will be other people who are quite overtly the odd one out in the room because they dress in a different way or they look different to what I look like. And I can imagine that would be quite wearing over time,
Yeah.
especially if it's met with negativity, which I've only once, well, this minor little incident, but I've only once been told to go back to my country.
Oh.
And I hated that and it made me
Yes. Yes.
so cross. And despite me thinking, oh, you should just shrug it off, and I found it really hard to shrug it off. It really disturbed me. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
it made me reflect. If you had to hear that sort of language more regularly rather than once in a blue moon,
Mm.
it would wear you down.
Absolutely. I'm so
Um,
sorry to hear you've had that experience, and I mean, you said it's only once, but once it's too many times. So yeah.
yeah, my children were there when it happened, which I actually thought,
Oh no.
no, I thought it was really good learning experience for all of us.
Okay.
Um,
How
in
so?
terms
Mm.
because they could see how it must feel, and because they saw it happening to one of the people they love most in the world, and they could see how it affected her. I think
Mm.
they could really see how it must feel,
Mm.
which I think until you've really felt it or seen it maybe in the way they did, you probably don't really get it. So I think it was a really good learning experience for them. It was definitely a good learning experience for me because um I thought it's something you can shrug off and you should shrug off. That would have been what I would previously have said
Yeah.
and thought. But no, very hard to shrug off and very hard to ignore. And if it's regular, that, oh no, that would wear me down.
Mm.
So again, I'm very conscious that um yeah, it my overwhelmingly positive, wonderful experience is not necessarily that of everybody else. Um, it was really interesting. It's almost a shame that you having this discussion only with me today because it'd be really interesting to hear from colleagues in DCHS who um who sound different, like I sound different, but maybe also look different, and how that has played out for them, both
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
at work, but also in their private lives. Um, I don't think, I really do think the UK um, is a welcoming, lovely place to live in. But I do also know there are elements within the society that I think if they get their claws in you, they will drag you down.
Yeah. Oh,
So it'd be interesting to
unfortunately
hear,
so.
because I think a lot of the things I struggle with, like I miss home and I miss the sunshine and all that, um, others will probably identify with, and then there will be elements of my experience which was really positive that for others might feel negative. Like for example, I quite like it when people ask me where you're from,
Right.
because it gives me the opportunity to talk about that, and I actually like it and I enjoy it. But again, I know that that's not necessarily the experience for everybody either, because it keeps um, emphasizing the otherness, which sometimes I think is something people don't want to be reminded of.
Yeah. And regarding that, Elzabeth, is there anything that we can do if we're with colleagues who are from different countries, or even just anyone we come across in life? What are there any things we should be aware of? Anything that we can all try and do better here in DCHS and in our wider communities as well?
Yeah, again, I'm going to speak from my own experience because every single experience will be different and there will be so much
Of
history behind
course, yeah.
everybody's story that you just don't know. So I think um, I do think if you genuinely want to get to know somebody or want to hear about them or understand them, if that's genuinely what you're trying to do, then I think just chat to people and ask them and you know, I really there might be cases where that goes a bit wrong, but mostly I think we can all distinguish between you genuinely want to get to know me as a human being versus you are just trying to figure out what my otherness is all about. So I think it's
Mm.
if you're trying to figure out who someone is rather than what someone is and try and box them off in that sense, I really think for the most part, I think that will always land well. So I I don't mind being asked where I'm from. It probably has to be done in a certain context and in a certain way for it to not come across as offensive. But I just don't want us to be so scared to talk to people and get to know people for fear of saying
Mm.
something wrong.
Yeah.
And then, you know, if you do say something wrong or something that triggered someone because they've had bad experiences, then I think you just need to take the lead, that person's lead there and try and understand um why it landed the way it did. I think it's
Yeah.
probably important that we have those conversations because then we will all learn. And plus, then you can
Yes.
make it clear your intentions were genuinely good, if
Mm.
maybe it was misunderstood. So I'd rather because we're so worried about saying the wrong thing, aren't we? And I worry that that stops us from actually
Saying
having,
anything. Mm.
yeah, and that would be a shame.
Mm.
Um, So, for example, on a perhaps slightly lighter note, and I struggle with this as much as anybody, but if you if you hear a name, if someone introduces themselves or you see somebody's name and it's a name you're not sure how to say it, then I certainly am very inventive in ways to talk around someone's name.
Yeah.
I will I will try once and it comes out all wrong. I will find a way to construct a sentence to not have to say the name, and it's terrible thing to do. And I hear because I have a weird name. Of course it's a weird name. I know that. And I can hear sometimes people are so scared of saying it wrong that they'd rather not say it at all. And you can,
And how does that make you feel?
well, no, I don't like it. I
Mm.
understand it
Mm.
completely because I do the same thing, but I don't like it, and it makes you feel even a, it, it's not nice to be in an environment where you can hear people are actively trying to avoid saying your name.
Yeah.
And I have so much sympathy for it because I do the same thing. But I think we need to get over that as well. I'd rather a a clumsy attempt, um, but say my name. Say my name. It's fine. I don't take offense if you say it wrong.
Or
Something we
even
can,
humble yourself and ask somebody, how, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name. Can you tell me how I, that
yeah,
might be, yeah.
or if you say it and you know you've said it wrong again, then
Mm.
just make a comment on that saying, I bet I got it wrong again. And but I think it's so nice when people make the effort with your name. It is such a
Mm.
personal thing, and for fear of offending, I think we can probably offend more by avoiding the name. So
Yeah.
one thing we can all do is to get it correct when we write. So that's something I notice every time if someone who doesn't know me write to me in an email or whatever, and they made the effort to spell my name correctly, because that's
Mm.
you can just copy it. I really, really notice that, and I really appreciate that because that is something we can all do right. Um, and if you have a weird name like mine that's always misspelled and someone spells it right, you always see it. It always makes me happy when I see that. So, so that's something we can all get right. Even I can do that when I come across names I don't know. Um, so yeah, the name thing is one I think we could all work on. Yeah.
You've mentioned that sense of otherness a few times, which I think is a really good word to describe it. Are there any benefits to that, to feeling like the other in the room? Has that brought any benefits in your life as well?
I can absolutely hand on heart say that having lived in three, but really having lived in two quite distinct cultures has just been an enriching experience. It widens the horizons. It is fantastic. And yes, I do think I have a broader perspective and a different perspective because of my different background. And I do think sometimes I can view things with fresh eyes. As South Africans are quite direct and pragmatic, so maybe we say what we think as well,
Yeah.
more so maybe than the average British person would. So in terms of benefits, I love it. I love that I have a whole world in my head you that you don't. I've seen other
Hmm.
things. I've lived other things. That's wonderful. What is the downside of it? So on a good day, don't ask me in January, but ask me in June.
We're going to do this again in July. Yeah.
Yeah. On a good day, it's the identity thing that remains complex, and if anything, it's getting more and more complex as I get older. It's the sense of identity. So on a good day, I feel like I'm both South African and British, and that makes me a more rounded, more person with a broader perspective. On a bad day, I feel like neither. I feel
Yeah.
neither fish nor fowl. Um, but those are just on the gloomy, grey, dark January days. That's not that's the challenge. I think that sometimes you just don't feel you either anymore. But then that passes and you feel you both, and that's great. It's as much as I don't want my children to ever leave this country and go away, I can quite highly recommend that to any young person or to any person really, is to really live somewhere else for a bit, not just visit, but really live somewhere else. Because your view on the world and your perspectives, it just widens those horizons completely.
Yeah. How many years have you been in the UK now?
22,
And
20,
where?
23,
Oh,
something like that.
22 or 23. Where is home? Where is home now?
Yeah, I thought, you'd think after 23 years and owning a house and having children and, having a garden that you've seen developing, you'd think home would definitely be here.
Mm.
And again, it goes, I'm sure if you ask anybody, like, in similar circumstances to mine, I think it goes through phases. But I do hear myself, without thinking, I hear myself when I'm about to go to South Africa, I hear myself saying, I'm going home. And then sometimes I catch myself thinking, oh, I shouldn't say that. That's not home. Home is here. I should say home is here. But I think home, I have children here, I have a life here. So this is home, but there's something about, and especially if you're from a background and a culture like mine, I grew up on a farm, I grew up on a farm, and there's some connection to the earth, without trying to sound too dramatic about it. We have a connection with the land,
Yeah.
that when I'm back there, I don't know, there's like a hollowness always in me that only goes away when the plane touches down in Cape Town and I get off the plane, and then suddenly I feel whole. And you'd
Yes.
think after all these years that should no longer be the case, but it is. And I do think as I grow older, I think it's that longing for your young self and what you knew as a child. I think a lot of it is to do with that, maybe also, rather than maybe just the country as a whole. So I home home is on a good day, home is both the UK and South Africa, and on a sad day, home is that farm in Africa.
Mm. Oh, that's a beautiful answer. It really is, and it's such a complex subject. I agree with you. I think that you can have a quite a spiritual connection almost to the land where you were born, and clearly that stayed with you. Um, oh, that was fabulous, Elzabeth. Thank you so much. Is there anyone else in DCHS with a good story to tell that you would like to hear? I know you mentioned earlier in our chat you would be interested in other stories of immigration in DCHS. Anybody else that you might suggest we could talk to?
No, I don't have anybody that I would nominate by name, but I do think we could all benefit um, from hearing a story that perhaps the reasons why you left weren't entirely, there were some push factors rather than just pull factors, or vice
Yeah,
versa.
yeah,
Um, that would, we've got friends here in the village who are from the Ukraine, and they had to leave because of the war. And I feel
mm,
it's weird, but I feel such kindred spirits with them simply because we're both not from here.
yeah,
I find it really interesting to hear from people who um, didn't necessarily leave their country through completely let's go and have fun and see the world reasons, but perhaps some other reasons. And also from somebody who are in the UK and choose to be in the UK, but haven't necessarily find the whole thing maybe as easy as I have.
yeah.
Because we can all learn, even though I'm an immigrant, but I can't claim I always know how to help other immigrants because my story is so different. So if it's a case of getting to know each other better as people living in the UK, I'd be really interested to hear any other stories as well. So I don't know if anybody's listening, or if you know somebody that you work with who'd be willing to have a chat. Emma's lovely. I can. You don't need to be scared, but I think that would be an interesting conversation to listen to. I'd certainly love that.
I agree. And yeah, we would definitely like to hear more stories. So if anyone's listening, please get in touch with the comms team and we'd love to share more of these kinds of stories. Elzabeth, thank you so much. It was really interesting to hear a bit about your life. So thank you for sharing that with us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. And I look forward to the next podcast.